The report culminated in a number of results and recommendations, including the need to launch a campaign aimed at reducing or limiting the phenomenon of internet cuts. Our workshop and seminar today comes as a part of this campaign or first step of this campaign. Joining us today is a number of experts on the matter from different regions and different Arab countries, including but not limited to experts who have extensive activism in the field of internet cuts. Joining us is Ms. Afef, who has extensive experience. She has an MA in digital culture from Amsterdam. Joining us also is Ms. Fatima Zohra from Algeria, a trainer on digital security with the Arab network of digital technology. She has worked as a coordinator. She is also an activist on women's issues and gender. She takes part in UN Women and is known for her innovation with regards to gender issues. She has launched a new program in the area which raises awareness on gender-biased internet violence, and she also strives to continuously develop the skills of women and the youth in the MENA region. Also joining us later, Ms. Abdulkareem, the coordinator at the Arab Network for Community Media. So to introduce our campaign, it is a campaign that is a collaboration between several organizations, including SMEX, Internet Society, and it strives to monitor internet status closely, especially during examination periods, as well as following up on any impacts that might result from these practices. This campaign also aims at following up closely on the status of the internet in Algeria, Mauritania, Syria, and Sudan, provided that things are stable once again and examinations are held in their due time. These countries were selected due to their history in regards to internet cuts during examination periods. For example, Algeria is preparing this year for official examinations between the 11th of June and the 15th of June of 2023. As such, Algeria has had several precedents when it comes to internet cuts, as the Algerian government has cut the internet back in 2016. And of course, this has included several platforms and has brought down several cellular networks as well. These measures are important considerations according to the Algerian authorities in order to prevent cheating during examinations. In Jordan, on the other hand, examinations are scheduled between the 4th and the 25th of July, 2023. Since 2015, Jordanian authorities have adopted several measures during official examination period for the secondary school students. Mainly, it has limited access to social media platforms during these periods. This prohibition has no legal basis because the Jordanian law does not provide for any of these practices. Also in Iraq, where baccalaureate exams are to be held between the 21st of June and the 15th of July. Since 2015, also, as is the case in Jordan, the Iraqi government has cut the internet during examination periods in several areas. First, it started in 2015 through internet cuts on mobile phones for 3 hours. And later on, this practice was expanded to include several other platforms. This year, we noted that social media platforms and texting apps were completely dysfunctional during examination periods. For Mauritania, the official examination period is to take place between the 14th of June and the 28th of June. Mauritania has also joined the club of countries cutting the internet, but it joined rather late in 2019, whereby authorities cut the internet or limited the access to social media platforms and texting apps for around 5 hours. And this, of course, included several locations across the country. As such, we expect this year to also witness similar internet cuts in the aforementioned countries. Sudan has also adopted several measures to limit cheating, such as internet cuts, but unfortunately, as a result of the current situation in Sudan, we expect the exams not to take place in their due time. And we also expect that the government will resort to other measures. As for Syria, baccalaureate exams will be taking place between the 7th and 26th of July 2023. Since 2016, Syria has adopted several measures along with the official examination period in an attempt to prevent cheating. Also, internet cuts included periods where official examination periods were distributed to the different examination centers to adopt any or to prevent any leaks. Internet cuts were extended or stretched over around 5 hours per day during these periods. This campaign that we're launching provides a number of tools in an attempt for us to deliver a message to authorities stating that the effectiveness of these practices has been under the microscope for a while, and they have proven ineffective in limiting cheating, but rather have detrimental impacts on the economy, on society. I will now move to the speakers, starting with Asya. Thank you so much for being with us today. Let me introduce Asya again. If we could please ask the speaker to raise his voice. So Asya is a political activist and has long studied the intersection between technology and human rights. Also, we have Mr. Fatima, a coordinator from Algeria, as well as Afef, who is a project coordinator. First, please give us your opinion on the effectiveness of internet cuts during examination periods as a way to limit cheating. I can probably start with Afef, since she has taken part in the research published last year tackling this very subject. Thank you so much, Hanna. First, allow me to start by saying the following. In light of a lack of transparency within institutions, it is difficult to it is difficult to determine with accurate numbers the feasibility and the effectiveness of this tactic, because governments are not really discussing or not really providing information on how effective internet cuts and how it contributes to preventing and combating cheating on official examinations. Secondly, according to the report that we had published in SMEX last year, with the support of Internet Society on this phenomenon specifically, we found that on several instances, despite the internet cuts, cheating and leaking of exams still took place, because this leaking does not have to go through the internet. Some officials, maybe some students, some teachers, some administration members might resort to leaking these exams without having to resort to the internet. So this is the first issue. Also, we noted in 2021 several exam leaks despite internet cuts. The same was the case of Algeria, despite of internet cuts that had happened and the arrests that were made in 2020. Examinations were leaked despite of the internet cuts, and the right measures were taken against the perpetrators. In my opinion, internet cuts or resorting to cutting the internet is half a solution. We have a major issue at hand in the Arab world, represented in the failure of the educational system, and our governments, instead of striving to find alternative solutions to these issues, they resort to cutting the internet as a way to circumvent the problem. Thank you, Afef. Fatima, what is your opinion on internet cuts as a solution to cheating?
شكرا حنا.
Hello, thank you, Hanna. I agree with everything that has mentioned. In Algeria, for example, cutting the internet as a way to stop cheating was not an alternative or a strong radical solution. Cheating cases and leaking cases are still taking place since 2011. Every time the government attempted to block the internet, we noticed that this measure was not successful in preventing cases or leakings and cheating that start cases of leaking that begin basically with the teachers and with the with the national security, because currently examinations are transferred from the capital to different areas. Basically, this is done through the national security and the national police, and in spite of that, leaking still takes place, sometimes even before the exam start. So on the evening of the examinations, the exams are leaked. So in many cases, we have several documented cases that this measure was not successful in combating cheating and leaking. On the contrary, we now face innovative ways of cheating and leaking during the examination periods. This is the case of Algeria. When did Algeria start cutting the internet? In 2015, after the first examinations were leaked. Exams were leaked on a large scale to an extent whereby you would find these examinations on Facebook pages, etc. So this was done on the eve of the exam, which prompted the government to limit access to social media platforms. And since then, I think the government saw this practice as effective in a way, and therefore they started doing it on a yearly basis. So they would stop the internet for the first 40 minutes of the exam, but I think since 2019, the government has resorted to complete cuts for 8 hours, i.e. a full shift, basically. Thank you, Fatima. Moving to you, Asya. What is the situation like in Iraq? Is it the same? Yes, our suffering, unfortunately, is the same, and internet cuts is one of the hobbies of our government. According to my information, authorities are now convinced that cutting the internet during protests is something detrimental to the economy and the national security, but they still don't believe that, but they still believe that cutting the internet during exams is a necessity. So this is why we have sounded the alarm this year in Iraq when the authorities have resorted to full cuts. And as you know, official exams take some official exams basically are taken by students who did not have the chance to complete their exams before, even though examination periods do not exceed 2 hours, the government resorts to cutting the internet for 8 hours or 5 hours on end. Is it an effective solution? We are still hearing about leaks, about cheating cases happening.
السلطة تتناسى أن من يغش يغش
even beyond the internet cuts, because the authorities tend to forget that anyone who wants to cheat will do so in any way whatsoever, and they do not really need the internet to actually do that. We also need to point out that people in Iraq do not really rise against internet cuts because they do not really know what their digital rights are. And since there is no one fighting these practices, authorities are continuing with these practices, which has made it harder for us to combat this phenomenon in Iraq.
شكرا لكم. طيب، لماذا الإصرار على هذا الإجراء إذن؟ من الواضح أن الجميع يرى أن الغش يتم ويحدث.
It is clear that cheating will take place even if the internet is cut. So what is prompting authorities to continue or to pursue these practices? Just as I said before, maybe they want to show society that they're doing something about it, that they're offering some sort of solution. I think internet cuts remind me of the issue of desertification and water scarcity in Tunisia. The solution, for example, was to cut the water at night, which is basically an ineffective solution because no one is using the internet or the water at night. Let's just say that our governments are still way behind. They still resort to solutions that are ineffective, that do not have any positive impacts whatsoever in solving the problem at hand. And they continue to follow the same measures for years on end, in spite of the detrimental effects that this leaves on the economy and society as a whole. Also, Internet cuts have been greatly normalized thus far. So it is as if governments want to get the people used to internet cuts in order to resort to the same measures in other cases or other instances that might pose a risk to the government itself, such as protests, demonstrations, etc.
طب انت ذكرتي نقطة مهمة وهي التأثير على
You have mentioned an essential point, and that is the impact on national economy. Do you think this can be seen as a less important side effect in combating cheating, especially that in Algeria, internet cuts can stretch over 8 hours on end, and the same goes for Iraq?
ممكن أشارك؟ أوكي. هو يعني التأثير الاقتصادي لقطع الإنترنت.
The economic impact of internet cuts for 8 hours on end for 5 days consecutively, and sometimes 6 days even. So they might continue to cut the internet on the 6th day, even though there are no exams happening on the 6th day. So the impact on the private sector, on the economy, is highly adverse. And therefore, it is worth noting that financial experts have estimated losses as a result of internet cuts at $6 billion, which amounts to around $500 million a day in losses from the national treasury. Add to that $5 million in losses incurred by the private sector and telecom companies. And since we are importing the internet from other countries, we estimate losses in internet bills at $50 million. Also, telecom companies incur losses, as I said, amounting to $5 to $6 million over 5 days of exams. So we cannot really say that these are minor side effects. These are indirect costs resulting from internet cuts, especially that we do not have accurate numbers measuring the direct impact or the direct losses incurred as a result of internet cuts. For example, e-commerce websites, tourism websites, all of these will be negatively impacted by internet cuts. Also, citizens are unable to receive or generate documents that they need urgently, especially that for a week on end, the internet connection is cut completely, and therefore tourism companies cannot fulfill or cannot complete the transactions needed. There also has been a statement by the Minister of Telecom last year stating that the internet will not be cut during exam periods, but unfortunately we were surprised to see that once the exams started happening, the internet was cut nonetheless. Also, back in previous years, we used to still be able to send emails and receive text messages, but unfortunately, unlike what we were told and the promises we were given, internet was cut anyway. As a result, the Association for Customer Protection raised a direct petition to the President of the Republic to compensate companies and individuals. We also demanded the government to resort to alternative solutions, but unfortunately to no avail.
وبالنسبة للعراق آسيا العراق أحد الدول
What about Iraq, Asia? I think that Iraq is one of the countries developing its digital services and on the path or taking the path of digitization. How does this really comply with internet cuts in the country? We cannot really describe internet cuts as something that is on the margin, because the internet is a second largest sector in Iraq after the petroleum industry. We cannot really have numbers measuring the losses incurred, but according to one of the studies published in 2019, costs were estimated at $1,850,000,000 in losses, and that's only in 1 month. In Iraq today, unfortunately, we do not only have one examination period. We have initial examinations. Once the results are out, those who fail these exams will have to retake these exams in a second session. And therefore, as a result, if they fail in the second session, the Ministry of Education can also choose to have them undertake a third session. So now we have 3 examination periods happening in Iraq. Likewise, technology and digitization have become an essential part of the day-to-day life of Iraqis. Many instruments, many tools were digitized, and therefore they are now more impacted by internet cuts. Back in the previous years, maybe Iraqi citizens did not think that the internet would affect their lives because they only used it for entertainment. But now that we have e-commerce, now that we have businesses happening on Zoom and Teams, I think there has been more demand and more protests against these practices. One of the Iraqi officials also raised a petition asking the Iraqi government for clarification as to why the internet is being cut for long hours while exams only happen in the very first hours of the day. So why cut the internet for 8 hours or 7 hours while exams only happen in the first 2 hours of the day? This is not a side effect. It impacts all sectors of society, all segments of society, and it has become essential for us to raise awareness among Iraqi citizens to tell them basically that the internet is a fundamental part of their digital rights. This brings me to the next question. How do citizens deal with the internet cuts? How can they handle internet cuts? Can it be a natural phenomenon that just goes by without any protest whatsoever? Or should citizens actually strive to protest against these practices and maybe find alternative solutions there too? If I may start, please. Algerian citizens, since the start of internet cuts, have not raised a finger, have not launched any campaign, have not participated in any campaign on social media to protest against internet cuts, because this subject specifically is a thorny issue. Iraqi citizens have become used to the practices of our government. The internet has been cut since 2015 during protests and demonstrations that were launched against the government or whenever any political issue was discussed on a large scale. Simply, the government would resort to cutting the internet. However, since 2019, in addition to cutting the internet during baccalaureate exams, every Friday for 2 years now, the internet is cut for several hours.
الجزائري متعودين نجمع كامل لغاية
Apologies for the interruption. The speaker's voice is unclear. So every Friday, they would cut the internet from 7 a.m. to 12 p.m., sometimes partially, sometimes fully, especially during or the initial stages of the civil movement or the civic movement. Despite that, despite the demands of the people, no demands were made regarding the right to access the internet. No one raised a finger protesting internet cuts as an infringement on digital rights. And I think this is the result of the lack of awareness among people. Some people don't realize that the internet is a fundamental part of their digital rights. They see the internet as a way to access Instagram and to like some posts, to share some posts. They don't really know how to protest against these measures because they think that the internet is only a means to browse some social media platforms. I know people who have now understood that internet cuts bring adverse impacts, especially when they have online business to do or online exams to take with universities abroad. They noticed that their business or their day-to-day life was greatly impacted by these practices. And this is only when they understood that internet cuts is not simply a day-to-day talk or a form of a digital detox or a form of luxury that they can simply enjoy. No, it is actually a phenomenon that brings several adverse impacts to some citizens more than others, maybe. Thank you. Afef, how can citizens deal with this issue? I will give you an example. We at SMEX last year have launched a campaign which involved the testimonials from citizens who have been impacted by internet cuts. So our audience in SMEX can have more awareness with regards to this issue and more awareness with regards to their digital rights. Another issue is maybe or consists maybe of some fears. Some people fear that if they protest against the government's policies, they will be retaliated against through arrests, through imprisonment, maybe, or through several restrictions on their freedom of expression. So I think this poses a great barrier for civil society organizations and citizens alike, and it deters them basically from combating or protesting against these practices. What happened in Sudan was a strategic litigation whereby a lawyer filed a complaint against filed a lawsuit against one of the companies as a citizen who was impacted by internet cuts. I think this is one of the tactics that civil society can resort to those affected by these policies can resort to this measure to put pressure on authorities. Also, associations, customer protection associations can come together and form congregations to put more pressure on authorities in this regard.
وتحاولوا حتى تلقاو يعني الشهادات نتاع المواطنين والمواطنات اللي كانوا تضروا شوفوا طرق كيفاش باش نكونوا يعني نخدموا مع المضرات نفسهم لحتى نحاولوا
We can also work with people directly affected by internet cuts in an attempt to catalyze change in these policies.
يؤثر أو تؤثر عمليات القطع على ثقة المواطن
Do internet cuts
وهل هي أحد أسباب عدم اعتماد
hinder
الوسائل الإلكترونية في
people's trust in the internet in the internet as a whole? Does it affect day-to-day transactions? Of course, there is no denying, especially in Iraq. Very little people actually have bank accounts, have credit cards and debit cards because of their distrust in the banking system. As I said, many people believe that the internet is a luxury and not a necessity. So let us deal with the root causes that affect our lives outside the internet. And of course, this has come after several incidents, several cases of internet cuts during protests. And unfortunately, Iraqi citizens often resort to finding an alternative rather than finding a solution. Also, during these protests, Iraqi people did not really call for the fulfillment of their digital rights,
يسهل على السلطة اليوم إنه تقوم بقطع
which makes it easier for authorities to resort to the same measures during examination periods, since it is not facing any real resistance from the people. In Iraq today, we don't really depend on the internet. Some Iraqis living abroad might use the internet for their day-to-day business, but in Iraq or inside the country, as I said, the internet is still a luxury for many people. We have conducted several interviews to measure the impact of internet cuts, and we noticed that several people are affected by internet cuts, including the LGBTQ community, as this prevents them from resorting to calls to actually communicate with one another. So what makes it easier for the state to cut the internet is the fact that citizens do not really rely on the internet as an essential part of their day-to-day life. Afef has offered several alternatives used in Sudan to put pressure on decision makers, and that is strategic litigation. Also, Fatima has mentioned an attempt by the Customer Protection Authority. What about telecom companies? Telecom companies are directly affected by internet cuts, as we all know. Do you think they have a role to play in shedding light on the ineffectiveness of these practices? If possible, let me comment on the Iraqi case. Many business owners and telecom company owners are affiliated to political parties and armed factions, and therefore internet cuts for them is came to them on a silver plate. They completely abide by the wishes and whims of these political parties. I also believe that they might have a role to play when it comes to internet cuts during examination period, because this will incur them an economic loss, a purely economic loss. The Ministry of Telecom in Iraq and the Telecom and Media Authority is the main responsible entity because it is the one that issues that issues this decision. Telecom companies are therefore bound to apply, and they have no right to complain since it is a matter of national security. One more thing, Iraq unfortunately is ruled by trends. Authorities will not move a finger unless there is a trend happening on social media, unless it notices direct criticism from citizens against a certain practice, for example. As long as it is not trendy, it is not, the issue is not trending on the internet, no measure will be taken. And therefore, this can offer a solution for us. Maybe we can launch a campaign through a certain hashtag to raise the awareness of citizens, telling them that raising the voice and protesting against internet cuts is a fundamental digital right of their own. As I said, today we are ruled by trends, but fortunately, this time around, we're going to try to use these same measures to try and get our voices heard. Regarding Algeria, we have 3 telecom companies, Ooredoo, Mobilis, and the state telecom company. They control the internet directly. Etisalat Aljazair or Algeria Telecom is the one that resorts to cutting the internet from the source. As for the losses amongst telecom companies, there are no clear estimations published, but by doing a small equation, we can actually estimate the scale of losses incurred by telecom companies in Iraq on day-to-day basis, and which can amount to $5 million. The telecom authority in Algeria did not find any alternative to compensate for telecom companies and for subscribers. But these companies, nonetheless, have not really and legally called for compensation. So we can see that they are on the same page. Maybe they are accomplices to the National Telecom Authority. It is as if someone from the Telecom Authority convinced these telecom companies that they can actually generate more economic revenue through different tools. And allow me to say that all of this happens while students are not even allowed to bring any electronic device to their school. Also, there are several scanners stationed at the examination centers. If someone is found to have a mobile phone on them, it will be confiscated for around 3 months. So you have students entering school without their phones on them anyway. You have a scanner in place and you have distortion devices put in place, and nonetheless, internet cuts are still taking place.
لكن يعني معناتها هذا مش حل، لانهم هم في الاخير عندهم تليفوناتهم، اوكي ما فيش نت فبس، لكن في طرق ثانيه لتسريب.
And maybe internet cuts are a way to prevent basically administrators or supervisors from leaking the exams themselves, which only proves that internet cuts are not the solution.
والثانيتين هما خاصتين فممكن عادي يتم ضدهم إجراءات قمعية وإيقاف العمل معهم. ممكن أتفهم ذلك، لكن لم يتم ولا مرة يعني بطريقة مباشرة أنهم أعلنوا عن موقفهم الصريح أنهم ضد أو
And
مع.
as I said, telecom companies have not expressed any complaints whatsoever, except maybe in one or two instances where they said that they wish to find alternative solutions. As for your previous question regarding the use of the internet by citizens, we in Algeria do not have any trust in telecom companies. These telecom companies are the target of several complaints by Iraqi people, as they are considered accomplices to the state in internet cuts. Within Algeria, we have a simple electronic system under development, and that is an electronic or an e-payment internal system. But unfortunately, people do not trust in that. They still would rather go to the official post office, make the queue in order to make the necessary payments or receive remittances, rather than use the money transfer services via the internet or online. The speaker's voice is being interrupted. Apologies for any gaps in the interpretation. Bottom line, we do not trust telecom companies. This subject is a broad one. Allow me first to say that private companies in general have a lot of responsibilities by virtue of the international law and the international or the UN guiding principles when it comes to human rights and the responsibility of corporations vis-a-vis human rights. But just as Asya and Fatima said, the local law imposes on these companies to actually succumb to the demands of governments and authorities. And also the lack of transparency in contracts signed between these companies and governments contributes to this factor. A lot of laws, as we said, force these companies to comply. At the same time, we have to know who owns these companies. In the majority of countries, we notice that there is not many competing telecom companies. Even if we have several companies in the same country, the number does not exceed 2 or 3. And these companies usually are state-owned or are closely affiliated to the government or to official authorities. Also, in some countries, if the context, the political context allows, and if there is relative political openness, companies that are not state-owned might attempt to convince the government, might attempt to engage in discussions with the government to try and convince them that these policies are not effective and are detrimental to the companies, to the state, to the government, to the economy, and to society as a whole. This can be a way in combating these practices. Also, in the Arab world, we have several companies that are owned by other companies based in Europe. For example, Orange is now operational in Tunisia and Jordan. I'm not sure it is operational in Algeria. And even Vodafone in Egypt. These are foreign companies that have affiliates in our Arab countries. And these companies usually have commitments when it comes to human rights. And therefore, civil society can put pressure on these international companies so that they can maybe try and adopt more transparency vis-a-vis the orders they receive from governments. And as such, civil society would be able to use this data and information in its advocacy campaigns. Thank you so much. In order to keep time, I have a question from participants. I would like to also remind the participants that they can post their questions in the chat box.
السلبي من قطع الإنترنت وهل السبب هو
My question is the following. How can we raise awareness amongst government officials vis-a-vis the detrimental impact of internet cuts? And what are the steps that you think should be taken in this regard?
أعتقد أن عفاف كان نعم.
I think Afef wanted to take the floor. Regarding the steps, I believe as a first step, we need to strive to raise awareness, not for society alone, but also for governments and companies. We also need to adopt specific measures for each country. Every country in the Middle East and North Africa differs in context and in advocacy tools. And therefore, all advocacy tools have to be localized, have to match the local context. Maybe some CSOs might choose to engage in dialogue with authorities. In general, as I said, we need to focus on raising awareness, on also gathering the testimonials of people who were affected by internet cuts. Thank you. In the context of privatization in Algeria, what are the most effective measures to raise awareness against the impact of internet cuts, especially during examination periods? The best way would actually be to share testimonials and data of victims of internet cuts. Maybe we can resort to facts and case studies so that people can link their own reality to that of others. I know many people who suffer a lot of direct impact as a result of internet cuts, and only then they can understand the real impact of internet cuts against individuals, companies, and the economy as a whole. So a campaign on social media before the exam can prove to be very effective, provided it is centered around testimonials of victims. This will help raise awareness, whereby internet access can be portrayed as an integral part of human rights, and that legally internet cuts are not allowed. Also, it is important to touch upon the emotional factor or the ethos, so to speak, because it will prove the most effective. Sharing testimonials as such can contribute to raising awareness among citizens. And after that, maybe we can start discussing the economic impact of internet cuts. It is worth noting that last year, an association of e-merchants or e-traders, they have established a group on Facebook and shared their experiences, whereby they strived to better their experience in the upcoming years so that they do not suffer the same impact, so that they can maybe circumvent the adverse effects of internet cuts. So they have mentioned their experiences. Every merchant shared their experience. They took screenshots. They shared these screenshots on Facebook through public and private accounts. And as a result, we noticed that there was a lot of interaction from the people, especially those who have lost or who have incurred great costs. So I think whenever we want to talk about internet costs, we do not need to approach the matter from a purely technical perspective, but rather touch on the pathos of people. What about the case of Iraq, Asya? I think in Iraq, direct communication with the Ministry of Communication and the Ministry of Education would be effective. I don't think the Ministry of Education is aware of the detrimental impacts of internet cuts, of other measures that can be taken to prevent cheating. So maybe raising awareness can and basically protesting against these practices can prove effective, especially if they are raised to the Ministry of Education, which will in turn put pressure on the Ministry of Telecom. I believe also coordination between ministries, holding meetings with these ministries can help raise awareness and help maybe reduce the number of instances where the internet is cut. Also, campaigns can be launched, public campaigns on social media can prove also very effective and can prompt the Iraqi authority to make a decision in this regard. It is also fundamental for us to convince people that there's a problem at hand and that we need to solve this problem. Once we convince these people, once we are able to mobilize them, we will be able to put pressure more easily on the government. We will be able to have this domino effect and take several ensuing steps to address this phenomenon. Please allow me to take a moment to thank the speakers who have joined us today, Fatima, Asya, and Afef, for the valuable information they have provided us with. We have talked about internet cuts during examination periods. We talked about the several trends and instruments whereby internet cuts are used in the Arab world. We also talked about the effectiveness of this practice. We talked about the impacts on citizens, on the economy, and on society as a whole. And we have also discussed a number of alternatives that can be taken into consideration. I believe we are a bit over time. So please allow me to end this meeting on a high note by thanking the participants and allow me to also share with you the link to the campaign website, accessnow.org. We will be sharing the link with you in the chat box as well. Anyone interested can actually share their experiences and their stories on this channel. They can also use Twitter and other social media platforms through the dedicated hashtags. Thank you so much. Last but not least, allow me to thank you all, and we hope that we do not have to repeat the session or this discussion once again next year. Thank you.
Recording